The 1863 civilians of Gettysburg were reluctant witnesses to the Great Battle. Join Ken Rich, the man in the red shirt, for his historic town walking tours. You could book these tours by emailing ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. That's ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. And when you're in town, look for the guy in the red shirt.
Want the freshest cup of coffee in Gettysburg? Then visit 82 Cafe at 82 Steinway Avenue. They roast all of their coffee in-house and have a full coffee bar to keep you caffeinated during your visit. Check them out at www.raggededgerc.com for their menu and shipping options and their freshly roasted coffee. Use promo code Hancock for 10% off your order. That's 82 Cafe at 82 Steinway Avenue across from the Dobbin House or raggededgerc.com.
Enjoy historical stories on the History Fix platform. Explore movies, short films, and documentaries. Addressing Gettysburg podcast fans receive an extra $5 off the first year's annual subscription. Sign up at historyfix.com and use promo code Gettysburg. Every subscription includes a 7-day risk-free trial. Escape into history with History Fix.
This episode of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you in part by me, audiobook narrator Mike Scott, narrator of Savis Beattie's Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864, and Unlike Anything That Ever Floated, the Monitor and Virginia and the Battle of Hampton Roads. If you are an author or publisher interested in having your titles produced as audiobooks, or even just in learning more about the process, give me a shout. You can find my contact info on my website, MikeScottVoice.com. That's MikeScottVoice.com.
And Civil War Trails. It's the world's largest open-air museum, and they offer over 1,300 sites across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg Campaign turn by turn, paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote earthworks and artillery positions. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure and explore their interactive map. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own. All free episodes of Addressing Gettysburg are brought to you by our sponsors and our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. To become a sponsor, send an email to matt@addressinggettysburg.com. And to be a patron, go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg today. And we thank you in advance.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
I made my notes bigger. I made them.
You're getting to be old. That's the reason why.
Last week,
that way you don't have to wear your glasses.
I couldn't read my notes.
Up to like 18 tight. That's what I do.
Yeah, that's true. 18's good. Yeah, well, I need to keep myself in. Keep it in context. Okay. Okay, can everybody hear all right? Okay, I think I got it on. So welcome everyone to the Farnsworth House Sunday evening lecture series. I forget exactly what we're calling it. But of course, this week we're going to talk about Jennie Wade. I guess it's almost like a joke that every year I pick a week and I talk about Jennie Wade or some aspect of Jennie Wade's life and the battle surrounding her house. Next week, we are doing a program next Sunday, but then the Sunday after that will be the Super Bowl Sunday, which we don't do a program. And after that, of course, it's Valentine's Day, I believe. So, and President, I forget exactly what hits there, but I don't think we're doing a program for the first 2. Next week we'll do a program, but then in the next 2 weeks in February we'll take off. And next week I didn't really announce yet what the program is going to be, but I think that next week I'll do another version of my commercialism program. People really seem to like that. I got a lot of feedback on that. Nothing people like more than looking at images of old motels that used to be here that are no longer here. So I'll do something about the commercialism of the battlefield and show some of my postcards in that. Sometime this week I'll advertise it on Facebook. But tonight's program, I'm going to highlight Jack, Jennie, and Wesley. And of course, it's about the story that surrounds the death of Jennie Wade. At 8:30 a.m. on the morning of July 3rd, 1863, a bullet was fired from the edge of town, very near to where we are sitting now. The projectile traveled up the street and crashed through a wooden door of a brick house and then through the panel of a second interior door. Standing behind the interior door was 20-year-old Mary Virginia Wade, kneading dough in a tray in preparation for making biscuits or bread. The bullet struck her in the back, passed through her heart, killing her instantly. Jennie Wade, as she would come to be popularly known, was the only civilian killed in the Battle of Gettysburg. The death of Jennie Wade gained national press and national attention, and her story was told and retold. But beyond her death, another story slowly emerged over the years. The story of her boyfriend, his mortal wounding, and a supposed message he attempted to have delivered to Jennie. And this story, this is going to be the story that's going to be the topic of our program tonight, or the contents of our program. According to my friend and historian William Frassinito, the intricate and sometimes amazing tale of Jennie Wade, Jack Skelly, and Wesley Culp has long since emerged as one of the classic human interest stories in the Battle of Gettysburg. As exaggerated and contrived as the story might sound at first glance, most of its particulars have withstood the scrutiny of historians. And that's something I find fascinating about this story we're going to talk about. That, constantly we find ourselves challenging parts of popular stories surrounding the battle or popular myths surrounding the battle. And although there's a few things in the story, I'll highlight that have been embellished or exaggerated, the story itself, pretty much stands up. So before we go into specifics, let's talk about some of the basics of the story. So Jennie Wade, the only civilian killed in the battle, had a boyfriend or childhood sweetheart, Johnston H. Skelly Jr. At the outbreak of the war, he joined the Union Army, and throughout the war, he kept up a correspondence with Jennie Wade. At the outbreak of the Gettysburg Campaign, Jack, as a member of the 87th Pennsylvania, was stationed at Winchester, Virginia, when a force of Confederates under Confederate General Richard Ewell surrounded the garrison. In the early hours of June 15th, Jack was wounded and captured in the fighting north of Winchester at a place called Stevenson's Depot. As luck would have it, the 2nd Virginia Infantry of the Stonewall Brigade, who had been involved in the fighting, happened upon the field among the Union wounded and captured. And as luck would have it, Wesley Culp happened to be part of the 2nd Virginia amongst those prisoners. And as luck would have it, Wesley Culp was from Gettysburg and had moved to Virginia prior to the war, and at the outbreak of hostilities joined a Virginia infantry unit. And as luck would have it, Wesley recognized some of the prisoners as members of a local unit from Gettysburg and learned that Jack Skelly was wounded. And according to the story, Jack Skelly gave a message to Wesley to be delivered to Jack's mom in case that Wesley ever found himself back in Gettysburg. And as luck would have it, Wesley did find himself in Gettysburg 2 weeks later. He visited his sister and told her he had a message for Jack's mom and intended to return and deliver it the next day. Unfortunately, Wesley was killed in the fighting, and never divulged the contents of the message. Of course, some people say that part of the message was for Jack's sweetheart, Jennie Wade. And of course, she died on the morning of July 3rd, 1863, never learning that her boyfriend was dying in a hospital in Virginia. And of course, Jack died of his wounds in Winchester on July 12th, 1863, never learning that Jennie was the only civilian to be killed in the fighting at Gettysburg. Today, Jennie and Jack are buried in Evergreen Cemetery, a short distance from each other. So a little biographical information on Jennie, Jack, and Wesley. Of course, Jennie is Mary Virginia Wade, born on May 21st, 1843. So she was 20 years old at the time of the battle. One of 6 children born to James Wade and Mary Ann Philby Wade. She also had an older half-brother. No matter how you qualify it, when you look into their family life, it was dysfunctional. And basically, Jennie came from a troubled family. Her father had multiple encounters with the local authorities, was in jail, our jail, several times, actually spent time in the state penitentiary in Philadelphia. At the time of the Civil War, he was in our local almshouse in the insane department, and in the 1860 census is listed as being, quote, very insane, unquote. On her mother's side of the family, her grandfather wasn't very stable, and according to his death certificate, when he died in the 1870s, it lists him as the cause of death as insanity. And her uncle on her mother's side had trouble with the law, and in 1862 there was a court case where he was beating his wife. We could go into greater detail on this point, but I just think it is fair to say that Jennie was not from one of the more upstanding families in the town. And that undoubtedly played into how she was perceived locally after the Civil War, when she gained national notoriety. And I also would suggest that this plays into the backlash that local people seem to have about Jennie Wade. And even more recently, people around town, tell stories about how their grandparents talked about Jennie Wade as having a bad reputation, or, being a Southern sympathizer. And undoubtedly, a lot of this has to do with the reputation that her family had even prior to the battle. Jack Skelly was Johnston Hastings Skelly Jr. He was born in Gettysburg on August 4th, 1841. So he was almost 2 years older than Jennie. His father was from Shippensburg. Jack was baptized in Shippensburg. And I think it wasn't too many years ago, maybe it was 20 years ago, I discovered their baptismal records of Jack and his siblings in the church records in Shippensburg. So Johnston H. Skelly Sr. was a native of Cumberland County, grew up near Shippensburg. He is said to have arrived in Gettysburg in 1836 and married in 1837. His first appearance in the Gettysburg newspapers is 1838. He was active in local politics, and in 1842 was listed at a county meeting as a friend of Henry Clay. There's a biography. Oh, okay. I must have skipped that part. That's all right. He was a tailor in town. Oh, I think that's coming up later. John Wesley Culp was born in 1839, so he's a couple years older than Jack. Some sources, and I think they're getting this from a mention of his birthday in a letter that survives from Wesley Culp, say that his birthday is probably July 1st, 1839. He was one of 11 children born to Esaias, I don't know if it's Esaias Jesse Culp, and Margaret Ann Sutherland Culp. Although he was descended from the Culps of Gettysburg, he was actually born in York Springs and spent his early life in York Springs while his family was located there. He probably only lived in Gettysburg from 1849 to 1856, when he moved to Virginia with the carriage maker C.W. Hoffman. But there's every reason to believe that he would have known Jennie Wade and Jack Skelly very, very, very closely. Culp's father was the first cousin of Henry Culp, who owns Culp's Hill. So we should tell you that if you ever hear that Wesley Culp was killed on, the farm where he played as a child or on his father's farm, he didn't grow up as a kid in Gettysburg, and that's his father's first cousin. He's not, although Culp's Hill, I should say, is named after his great-grandfather. But it's not like he's part of that Culp family. A lot of Culps in Gettysburg. I think in the 1860 census in Cumberland Township in Gettysburg, there are 100 people with the last name Culp. Just in case you're wondering, it's not just one family. Wesley's father was a tailor. Jennie's father was a tailor. Jack's father was a tailor. And at one time, the fathers had tailor businesses in the center of town here. And there's evidence that all three would have known each other very well. According to Johnston H. Skelly's brother, Daniel, quote, Jennie Wade's father, a Virginian, learned tailoring from the elder Skelly and lived at the Skelly home for 2 or 3 years while serving as his apprentice. So according to Daniel Skelly, I think writing in, I believe, 1929, Jennie Wade's father was in business with Jack Skelly's father for a time. And that's something you don't always hear. Now, as far as Jack and Jennie go, they were boyfriend and girlfriend. And, one of the reasons we always have known about this, besides the story of Jack and the message for Jennie, is that there are letters in the pension record of Jack Skelly at the National Archives. And I'm sure that you guys know that I am a huge fan of Jennie Wade. I've always been. I have no idea why. Just something I've always been interested in. And on one of my first visits to the National Archives, which undoubtedly was with Wayne Motts, I'm sure he probably took me the first time, but I pulled the pension record of Jack Skelly. And I knew that there were letters in Jack Skelly's pension record because Colonel Sheeds, who was a teacher at the local high school, had sent a student there years and years ago and had discovered these letters in the pension record. So I made copies of the letters in the pension file, and I put them in our collections at the Adams County Historical Society. And most people who have written books in more recent years about Jennie Wade, like Enrique de la Sandra, for instance, have made transcripts of the letters from our collection in Historical Society that I put there, and not going to the National Archives on their own and pulled the records again. Who knows? Do you think all the original letters are still in the file? Or because these things over the years have a way of disappearing, from the files down there. But the letters are extraordinary. Basically, what happened in the American Civil War, you could collect a pension if your son died in service. But you had to prove to the federal government that that son had supported you monetarily while they were in service. And as proof, the pension department required that you submit some kind of letters or something, or some kind of documentation that they were giving you money. And so all the letters that Jack wrote to his mom that say, enclosed is $5, she sent to the National Archives. And I've seen these in file after file after file, and there's usually a letter with it every time. Please send the letters back when you're finished with them. And they never send them back. So in the mother's and father's pensions, there are letters and diaries from Civil War soldiers. And it's one of the research options available to us if we were researching a certain unit in the Civil War when you go to the National Archives. But in these letters, there are several mentions of Jennie Wade. And these mentions of Jennie Wade are also, I should state, mentioned in Cindy Small's book on Jennie Wade. So she had an opportunity to look at these letters also. And it's fascinating. And in one of the letters, Jack is writing to his mom because he's tired of her spreading rumors about Jennie. He's very upset about her and the rumors about her. And he finally says something to her like, I don't trust the people of Gettysburg past a worthless set of dogs. Which is really interesting. And but when you read the letters, it's really hard to say. It's obvious that Jack likes Jennie, but it's hard to say that Jennie returns his affection in these letters. That's why it was just so incredible about 15 years ago when someone in Baltimore died and then willed some letters to someone in Lancaster, and then coincidentally Enrique de la Sandra was in contact with that person because she was trying to get a photograph of Jack Skelly from them, and they told her, hey, we just got some letters from Jennie Wade to Jack Skelly. We knew of the existence of these letters because they're mentioned by Daniel Skelly in an article in the Gettysburg newspaper at the time of his retirement. And he mentions he has a stack of letters from Jennie to Jack. And they're basically love letters, I think the article says. So we knew they existed, but we didn't know that they still existed. So these 8 letters were discovered. And in these 8 letters, it's clear that Jennie and Jack have a relationship. And one of the things that's told in the early accounts of Jennie and Jack is that they were engaged. As a matter of fact, a lot of people, and I'll tell you this, in William Frassinito's analysis of it, he doesn't seem to catch the fact that Jack and Jennie's engagement is in some of the really early accounts. I guess people have suggested that this is something that was made up more recently. but there's an 1885 account that talks about the naming of the GAR Hall. Our local GAR is called the Johnston H. Skelly Post. And in this article, it talks about how Jack and Jennie were engaged. Now, I don't know if I believe they were engaged, but I just wanted to mention that that's part of the story that has been around, and we're not sure exactly when it first developed, but it's been around since the 1880s, and people have discussed that as part of this story. Of course, as we know, they were secretly engaged. When asked about their engagement in 1913, Georgia Wade, Jennie's sister, Georgia Wade McClellan, stated that she didn't know they were engaged. Oh, come on, it's her sister. And if she doesn't know they're engaged, and we don't have any evidence they're engaged, how do we know they were secretly engaged if both of them died? So anyway, but their supposed engagement is an early part of this story. But in these 8 letters that recently surfaced, it's clear that they have some kind of relationship. And in the letters, Jennie several times refers to the idea that if Jack can get a furlough from the Army, it'll all be better. That she's looking forward to this supposed furlough that Jack's going to get. And early on in the story, besides these letters, there's this story that, she expects that Jack will get a furlough from the Army, and when he comes home, they're going to be married. Now that I look in totality at all the stuff that's been written about, I think I've done kind of a 180. I used to think that Jack really liked Jennie and Jennie didn't like Jack. Now I'm thinking Jack's staying in the Army to avoid Jennie. Jack re-enlists in the Army without telling Jennie he's re-enlisting. And she was expecting him to come home. And she's a little upset in one of the letters. So that's why I say that. Or maybe Jack just wants to serve his term out and wants to come home and they're going to be married after the war. Who knows? There's lots of things about this story that we have to conjecture. And that's why Jennie Wade has been a popular subject for novels. There's been 5 or 6 novels written about the relationship between Jack and Jennie. And if you get on the internet, you can look for one of these novels, and so they're very entertaining. So I think I'm sure I have them all. At the outbreak of the war, though, Jack joins the Army. He joins the 2nd Pennsylvania Infantry. Oh, I should mention that Jack had previously been in the Gettysburg Independent Blues. And there's really good information on that. And that is a local militia unit, a volunteer militia unit that, wears uniforms and they drill. They perform a drill every 4th of July at Spangler Spring, and they parade through the streets of the town on a regular basis. And for the militia, the big day was Washington's birthday. February 22nd, there's a parade. And there's a specific mention in one of the letters that Jennie wrote to Jack mentioning something that happened on February 22nd, 1861 that changed her life. And you infer in the letter that it's the moment when Jack told Jennie that, that he loved her. And if you want to infer anything else that might have happened on that day by reading the words of the letter, that's up to you. But some people have inferred something else. But Jack joins the whole Independent Blues, the militia unit, joins the 2nd Pennsylvania Infantry at the outbreak of the war in April of 1861. And this is Company E of the 2nd Pennsylvania Infantry, a 90-day unit. And then this 90-day unit, when they're released from service, a lot of them rejoin the Army and become Company F of the 87th Pennsylvania. Now, during their 90-day service, there's a couple letters in the National Archives written by Jack Skelly to his mother. And in one of them, he mentioned specifically that while he was in Martinsburg, he talked to some people there. His brother had lived down in Virginia for a while, Charles, and someone in Martinsburg told Jack Skelly that Wesley Culp had just left town with the 2nd Virginia, and that Wesley had joined the Southern Army. So we have a mention in a letter by Jack about Wesley. So obviously they knew each other. Now I should mention, also in that unit, along with Jack Skelly, the 2nd Pennsylvania, were Charles Skelly, who's Jack Skelly's brother, and, or maybe he's only later in the 87th, and the other guy in that unit is William Culp, Wesley Culp's brother. So Jack is serving with Wesley's brother in the same unit. Now I should mention that Wesley did join the Confederate Army at Shepherdstown. In 1856, Wesley had gone south with carriage maker C.W. Hoffman. He lived in Shepherdstown for a while, working with the carriage maker, then moved to Martinsburg, but then was back in Shepherdstown when he joined the 2nd Virginia. Charles Skelly had worked for Hoffman down in Virginia, Jack's brother. But when the things got hot and it looked like there might be war, Charles Skelly left the employment of Hoffman in Virginia, and he came back to Gettysburg and was living here by the 1860 census. So, but Wesley stayed. Wesley's mother had died in 1856. His father had remarried, and his father ended up dying in June 1861. And I guess Wesley wasn't that close to his family in Gettysburg, and he lived in Virginia for a time before the outbreak of the war, and he just stayed and joined a Southern unit at the outbreak of the war. I always try to imagine to myself, what would that have been like? Your family lives in the North, your brother is joining the Union Army. There must have been some kind of discussion amongst the siblings about this. We know that Wesley remained close with his sisters. When Wesley's father died in June of 1861, after Wesley's in the Army, Wesley's sisters go to Virginia through the lines and visit their brother to talk to him about it and meet comrades that served with Wesley. And we also know that Wesley was captured and detained in Baltimore in a prison camp for a time in 1862, and William Culp, when the 87th Pennsylvania was stationed near Baltimore, he actually went and visited Wesley as a prisoner and wrote home about it. And that letter survives in a collection of letters that had been handed down through William Culp's descendants. So even though they were on different sides, the two brothers talked, and there's no animosity in the letter where William talks about Wesley. So, some of the stories may have some animosity related into it, but it's just amazing how when you live on the border, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, that people serve in different armies and then still maintain some kind of relationship. And I think being from Baltimore, after the Civil War, when you got all these Union and Southern veterans that intermingle with each other on a daily basis, it's much more complicated than maybe for people that live in Massachusetts and South Carolina. When you're living amongst the people that you fought against, it's a little bit different. So Wesley's in the 2nd Virginia Infantry. Let's see. The 87th Pennsylvania, which contained William Culp, Charles Culp, and Charles Skelly and Johnston Skelly, was initially stationed near Baltimore and was guarding the railroad leading from Baltimore, the Northern Central Railroad, into Pennsylvania. And then eventually they were involved, they were sent to the Middle Military District over with Milroy's command, and in January of 1863, late December, early January, occupied Winchester, Virginia. Now, at the outbreak of the Gettysburg Campaign, General Richard Ewell's force, and you'll remember this if you were here during our program on Milroy's wagon train, moved into the Shenandoah Valley, surrounded, and basically, destroyed the garrison at Winchester in a series of battles between June 13th and June 15th, 1863. And in the early morning hours of June 15th, there was a battle north of Winchester at Stevenson's Depot near the Carter farm. And sometimes you see this referred to as the Battle of Carter's Woods. And obviously, there's sometimes skirmishes and battles have multiple names. But at this skirmish, Edward Johnson's division attacked Milroy's force, and the Stonewall Brigade took a major part in the fighting. And as far as I have been able to determine by using the official reports and the official reports atlas and the available information we have about it, the 2nd Virginia Infantry comes face to face with the 87th Pennsylvania. I don't know if anybody's ever read, there's a novel about Wesley Culp and by a guy named Bob O'Connell. I think he lives down near Harper's Ferry. And he actually, in this novel, has Wesley look across the lines and see William Culp on the other side while they're fighting. But these two units came up against each other. Years ago, I'm going to guess it was like 2000, something like that. In Winchester, Virginia, they were putting up wayside exhibits dealing with the Gettysburg Campaign. And they were putting up a wayside exhibit at 2nd Virginia at Stevenson's Depot. And I was writing for a magazine at that time, and the editor of the magazine told me about this wayside exhibit, and you could submit like text for these wayside exhibits. And I submitted 2 wayside exhibits for this battlefield. One was a straightforward, this is what happened here. And they actually were putting in a development called, I haven't been there in a while. Is it called like Cannon's Crossing or something like that? But anyway, they built a development right on the battlefield. And the second wayside exhibit I did was William and Wesley Culp. So I decided, instead of, a lot of people might want to highlight the story of Jack Skelly and the message for Jennie Wade, but I highlighted the fact that 2 brothers their units fought against each other at this site, and I had pictures of the brothers on the wayside. And it got put up. And as far as I know, I think last time I visited, somebody had taken a sledgehammer to it, beat it up pretty bad, but it's still there, as far as I know. So one of my early, achievements, a wayside exhibit. Do you know you make more writing a wayside exhibit than you do writing a book? Have you guys thought about that?
How much money do you make podcasting, Tim?
That's right. We do Civil War students do lots of things.
That's right.
Out of necessity or for free. But that was nice to get paid for that. So at this site, Carter's Woods or Stevenson's Depot, the South overran Milroy's force, and Milroy's force scattered to the winds. The 87th Pennsylvania tried to hold the Southern advance back as long as possible. The 87th Pennsylvania skirmish line was out in front. They were overrun. Jack Skelly was wounded in the fighting. And according to the only account we have of it, which was written by a guy named George Fleming in 1913, he interviewed guys in the 2nd Virginia and in the 87th Pennsylvania. During the fighting, the 2nd Virginia was coming across the field, and Wesley Culp noticed someone he recognized from Gettysburg, a guy named Charles Ziegler, who eventually was captured and spent time in Andersonville prison. And he realized that he had just fought against his brother's unit. That was his first indication that, this is his brother's unit that he's firing into. And in a letter that was written on June 26th, 1863, that we don't have a copy of the letter. We have a description of the letter and a newspaper account by one of the granddaughters of Anna Culp, who is the sister of Wesley Culp. It's very complicated. Printed in a New York newspaper. They described the contents of the letter, and there's a quote by Wesley Culp to his sister that, hey, I didn't see him. He survived the battle. He fled with the rest of the 87th that got away. So he didn't see his brother, but he realized that he fought against his brother's unit. And then he met another guy in the unit, a guy named William D. Holtzworth, who would later become one of the premier battlefield tour guides in Gettysburg. And William Holtzworth told Wesley that Jack Skelly was wounded. And Wesley was like, Jack, where's Jack? And he found Jack, and he managed to get Jack taken to a hospital. So Jack was shot in the arm. And it's interesting, in some of the accounts, they make it sound like Wesley hangs around Winchester for a few days afterwards and then goes to visit Jack in the hospital, which is the Taylor House Hospital in downtown Winchester, which is a fine restaurant today. So if you get an opportunity, you could visit the restaurant, and they actually have a plaque out in front of it telling the story of Jennie Wade and Jack Skelly and mentioning that he dies in the Taylor House Hotel. So, have you been to see that plaque? Anybody? So, homework. Oh, you said homework. Go to Winchester. It's on, I think it's Potomac Street, if I'm not mistaken. It's the street that they've closed, or Loudon Street. Do you know? It's Loudon Street. It's the street that's paved that cars are not allowed to drive on, and you walk up the street and you can find the Taylor House Hotel. But at some point, and I suggest that knowing that Johnston's division fought at Stevenson's Depot, which is like 5 miles north of Winchester, 4 or 5 miles, and that the next day they're on the march towards the Potomac, that he probably spoke to Jack on the battlefield and didn't visit him in the hospital later. But this is the opportunity where Jack is able to talk to Wesley, and whatever message Wesley is going to relay to the people in Gettysburg comes out of this meeting on the battlefield. And I have a few points I wanted to mention about this meeting. 3 things I say are important to know about this meeting. Now, according to all the early accounts of this, and when I say early accounts, starting in like 1913, the message is from Jack to Wesley to Jack's mom. And theoretically, he's just going to tell Jack's mom that I saw Wesley and he was wounded in the battlefield. He was wounded. But 3 things. Charles Skelly, Jack Skelly's brother, is captured at the same time, and he stays there with Jack. So Charles Skelly is captured as well. So let me just suggest this. Whatever message that Wesley Culp might have that he dies with, and we don't know what it is, don't you think his brother also knew what the message was? Wouldn't you tell your brother? And his brother never tells the story, and we don't have any evidence of him saying anything about a message to Jennie Wade or anybody else. And now what's the other? Oh, and then the thing I like is, okay, so when we're telling the story, let's say we're battlefield tour guides and we tell the story on a bus, and we have to do it, of course, in 30 seconds. We can't be dragging this story on. And if I'm telling the story, I don't know about you guys, if you ever tell the story on your tours, I tell it when I pass the Culp farm and I'm riding down that windy road at the base of Culp's Hill. So I get it done, I start it near the Culp farm and I end before we get to Spanger Sprint. So whatever I'm going to say, that's where I'm doing it. And I'm going to present it as if Jack gives a message to Wesley, and then at the very end, I'll mention who the girlfriend is. So I do it kind of a backwards way. But when I'm telling it, there's something that always bothers me about it. And it's, so Jack gives Wesley a message so that when Wesley's in Gettysburg 2 weeks later at the battle, he can deliver a message. How does Jack know that Wesley's going to be in Gettysburg 2 weeks later? Does this bother anybody else? I mean, it seems, when you're just telling the story, it seems obvious. Oh yeah, he's in Gettysburg 2 weeks later. They have no idea. He has no idea he's going to be in Gettysburg. So maybe, I'm going to suggest this, maybe Wesley finds himself in Gettysburg and Wesley's like, hey man, I should tell Jack's mom that Jack's wounded. Maybe it's not a message from Jack. Maybe Wesley wants to give a message to Jack's mom about him being wounded. That makes a lot more sense in the story. But again, I don't know if we want to rain on the parade of the story here. So anyway, we'll talk about that at the end. Okay, so I mentioned, all the versions of the story indicate that the message was for Jack's mom. And then also, do you know that members of the 87th Pennsylvania came to Gettysburg after the Battle of Winchester? There's several mentions of it. An early version is Sarah Broadhead. In her diary, written on June 19th, she says, another excitement today. The 87th Pennsylvania Volunteers is composed of men from this and adjacent counties, one company from our town being of the number. Word came that the captain, both lieutenants, and nearly all the officers and men had been killed or captured. Such a time as we had with those having friends in the regiment. At 10 o'clock, it was rumored that some of the men were coming in on the Chambersburg Pike, and not long afterwards, about a dozen of those who lived in town came here. And their report and presence relieved some and agonized others. Those whose friends were not of the party were in a heart-rendering plight, for these returned ones could not tell the others. Some would say, this one was killed or taken prisoner, and others, we saw him at such a place, and the rebels may have taken him, and thus we were kept in suspense. Have you thought about that? That Jennie probably knows that Jack is wounded. Now again, Jack is wounded in the arm. He's not dying. No one anticipates that Jack is dying. So even if Wesley has a message from Jack to give to somebody, it's not, I'm dying. He's shot in the arm. He's going to get a lot worse, and eventually he will die, but he's not dying at the moment. He's just wounded. And so I often wonder if what Jennie might know. It's a small town. She knows Jack's in the 87th. It was actually printed in the newspaper on June 23rd that a group of men from this unit came into the town. So it's actually in the newspaper. So she would have known, she would have talked to people, and she would have known if one of those people knew what happened to Jack. Now, again, it's possible that no one saw what happened to Jack and no one knew what happened to him, but then she would at least know he's missing. So, that's a part of the story we never seem to work into it, because it is quite a long time between the two events. And there is a telegraph in the town as well at that time. Okay. So I think it's a little early in the room, but I want to do a raffle now and take a small break. So I need Audrey. We have a new ticket picker person. It's been pointed out to me that I might be unfair in my ticket picking.
For the Historian has a wide variety of titles, new and used, of military books from publishers like Osprey, Gettysburg Publishing, Stackpole, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more. I make it a point to go there once a week because I have new bookshelves to fill, and I never know what treasures I'll find, and neither will you. They even have toy soldiers, model kits, games, children's books, and more. So stop by and check them out on your next visit to Gettysburg, or better yet, order right now online at forthehistorian.com and mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund you your shipping. And if you call 717-685-5207 or stop by the store on your next visit and mention us, you'll get 20% off retail price. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207. If you're a lover of history, then go to trhistorical.com. There you'll find apparel, decor, and gear, and our listeners will receive 10% off plus free shipping within the U.S. if you use promo code GBERG1863 at checkout. So take advantage of this deal at trhistorical.com. TR Historical, for the love of history.
You've heard us promote various ways that you can help us keep the show going, but one way we haven't pushed too much is our sutlery at addressinggettysburg.com/shop. That's a shame because we have designs over there by talented artists like Ty DeWitt of 1863 Designs and Mike Stretch of the Heritage Depot. So now we're promoting it. Buying shirts, hoodies, mugs, and other items from our sutlery not only helps us keep the lights on, but it also helps guys like Ty and Mike, and it helps spread the word about the show every time you wear an item or you sip from your mug. So head over to addressinggettysburg.com/shop and grab some merch. It's the perfect Christmas gift for the Gettys nerd in your family. That's addressinggettysburg.com/shop.
Hey Gettysburg business owners, winter is just around the bend, and you know what that means, no tourists. But just because people aren't coming to you doesn't mean you can't bring your business to them. If you ship, you're still in the game. And if you're a seasonal business, the time to advertise for your next season is in the off season when people are making their plans. So what's an affordable yet highly effective way of reaching those people? Well, it's not radio, it's not TV, and it's certainly not print. Step out of the Jurassic era of advertising and run an ad on Addressing Gettysburg. We just reached 1 million downloads, and we're growing by the tens of thousands every month. Beyond that, our audience is happy to support those who support their favorite podcast. So email sales@addressinggettysburg for more information about advertising on our show. We look forward to helping your business grow. That's sales@addressinggettysburg.com.
Oh, you know what? I wanted to mention that a couple of people already had questions, and I was going to say that here at the end of the program, because this is a shorter program than I often when I go on and on and on. Think about a question you might have that you want to ask me about Jennie Wade, if you're curious to what my reaction is or what I think about any Jennie Wade related question, because I have lots of information that I will not, throw out about Jennie Wade on this particular program. But it was interesting. A couple of people mentioned to me already that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you wouldn't tell your brother. You would. Maybe you keep secrets from your brother. You don't want your brother to tell your mom something you don't want him to tell her. Yeah. And it is fun. It is interesting when the first time I actually read that letter by Jack Skelly. There's a couple letters where you can tell that if you read between the lines, it appears as if Jack's mom wrote him a letter and say, guess what Jennie's doing now? You're not here, and guess what Jennie's up to? And he was admonishing her in this letter that he doesn't want her to be talking bad about his girlfriend And if she had a problem with it, he says something like, "You should have brought it up before I started going up there." And and people often ask me, did Jennie Wade have other boyfriends? And what's interesting about it is, I discovered and I think I discovered it on Google book search. I don't know if you guys use Google book search. I use it for all my research projects. Google book search, advanced search, full view only. And then I put a phrase in there, like Jennie Wade, or John Burns, or hid in cellar during battle. Or, what I really like to do, remember I mentioned shook hands with Lincoln. But I searched in there one day and I found this not a regimental history, but a reminiscence of the Civil War by a guy in the 10th New York Cavalry named Burton Porter. And in this little book, he says that in 1862, that the 10th New York, when they were stationed here through the winter of 61-62, that every man in the unit had a girlfriend in town. And his girlfriend was Jennie Wade. And he was really upset when she got killed a year later. Now, when he says that in the book, what does he mean by that? Does it mean that that's the girl he, hung out with or danced with once in a while? When you read the evidence of Jennie Wade cheating on Jack Skelly, the harshest comment in anything is that she was keeping Culp late. So she was keeping the company of other men late in the evening. That is the most damning thing you can find. So it's even when you look at the worst thing, it's not like we have evidence that she was up to no good. And in her letter, she to Jack, she keeps telling Jack how much she loves him and how much she wishes he was back. So it's fascinating. But I found that letter and I printed it out, and I had talked to Enrique D'Alessandra, I think her name is, who wrote a book on Johnston H. Skelly, where she reprinted the letters about, this was about 20 years ago. And I showed her this account, or this letter, and she put it in her book, but she put it in there and made it really nasty about Jennie. And so I really regret giving it to her. So I am now responsible for some of the ammunition that people use against Jennie. And I never intended that to happen. I'll have to, when I see Jennie in the afterlife, of course, I'm gonna apologize for that, So, and I'm sure I'll track her down. Okay. So where were we now? I'm got off topic. So, I mentioned that Wesley Culp is known to have written a letter to his sister, Anna Myers, Anna Culp Myers, on June 26, 1863. And the things we know about the letter are, it was written from Chambersburg. In the letter, he asked his sister to take care of Julia, their younger sister, and because the father had died, and they do have a stepmom that lives in town. But he's wanting her to look after her, and also that she's telling him that he's telling her that he saw, or that he knows that he fought against William's unit at Winchester. So according to that 1954 newspaper article, at that time, that letter written by Wesley Culp from Chambersburg was in the possession of Margaret Myers, who, again, she would be the niece of Wesley Culp, which is just fascinating to me. But no one knows what happened to that letter. Could be around somewhere. Maybe it still exists. Okay. So on July 1st, of course, there's heavy fighting in the town of Gettysburg, and that evening, Edward Johnston's division arrives. And if you know anything about the movements of the Confederate Army, Johnston's division of Ewell's Corps had marched through Chambersburg, up Route 11. They camped between Shippensburg and Carlisle. And when Lee had ordered for the concentration of the army to Gettysburg, since they weren't all the way to Carlisle, Johnston's division was ordered back towards Chambersburg, but then ended up coming down the Blackscap Road from Green Village. And on July 1st, they got in a big traffic jam on the Chambersburg Pike behind the wagons of Longstreet's Corps, and they didn't arrive in Gettysburg until the evening, or late in the evening, I should say early in the evening, and maybe it is, on July 1st. And, people speculate if Johnston's division had followed the rest of Ewell's Corps, maybe would have been here on July 1st and had some kind of impact in the battle at the end of the day. But when they arrived west of the town, they then came in the railroad bed. There's a great account by, I forget who it is, in one of the artillerymen, I believe, in Ewell's Corps, that they actually used the unfinished railroad to get through the town of Gettysburg and out to their position east of the town. And I guess by 8 p.m., they are in position near the Hanover Road, east of town, across the Daniel Lady Farm. And that evening, according to an account by someone in the 2nd Virginia, in a 1913 newspaper article about the homecoming of Wes Culp, it was called, that was published in a Pittsburgh newspaper, Wesley Culp goes to his captain and asks if he can get a pass to go into town and visit his sister. Now, again, his father had died. His mother died in 1856. His father died in 1861. So he must, at some point know or have corresponded, or somehow he knows where his sisters live and goes in town to visit them. I should mention that his stepmother, his father had remarried, she's still alive, and she owns a store here on Baltimore Street. And I often wonder if, Wesley had any kind of, or the rest of any of the siblings had any kind of connection to their stepmom. But she's alive at the time of the battle, and you never hear her mentioned in any aspects of the story. But he goes to his sister's house. Now, his sister Anna had married John Jefferson Myers in the spring of 1863. So John Jefferson Myers is the older brother of Sally Myers. Sally Myers Stewart, the nurse who kept the diary and wrote about it afterwards. And here's a little tidbit. I don't want to make it too complicated. I try to make it easy to understand, but if you were to mess with someone, just say to them, yeah, Wesley Culp's sister married Sally Myers' brother. That really hurts. At the Adams County Historical Society, in the Henry Stewart collection, Sally Myers Stewart's son, we have an original copy of the newspaper article called The Homecoming of Wes Culp, printed by this Pittsburgh Courier in 1913. And written on the side of it by Henry Stewart is, "My mother is the source of the information in this article about Wesley Culp returning to Gettysburg." And that's something I don't think a lot of people picked up on. Also, in that same newspaper, though 2 weeks before that Wesley Culp article, there was another article about Sally Myers during the battle, nursing for the wounded. So this reporter had gotten a couple articles out of Sally Myers for the newspaper. And Sally Myers' picture appears with Julia Culp in this 1913 George Fleming newspaper article. So that's a little tidbit that maybe people don't know about that account. Okay, but according to that article, Wesley Culp comes into town on the evening of July 1st, and it's clear it's the evening of July 1st. I love Cindy Small's book, great book. We talk about Jennie Wade all the time. I think, it's incredible how early on, she wanted to write a book about Jennie Wade, and, she did a great job. And the only thing I always tell her in the book, she has the meeting on July 2nd, which places Wesley Culp's death on July 3rd. And clearly, the meeting's on July 1st, and Wesley Culp probably died on July 2nd. And that's not that important of a detail. But in this article, Wesley Culp comes down Middle Street, knocks on his sister's door. Both sisters live together, and then Anna's with her husband, J. Jefferson Myers, and he visits them. They hug and they cry and they talk about their lives and how things are going, and it's a pretty happy meeting. And then towards the end of the meeting, according to this article, Anna Myers she actually asked him about fighting against his brother, Winchester, and he says he didn't know it and he wouldn't, kill him on purpose, and he didn't know he was there until afterwards. But Wesley says that I need to see Jack's mom. I saw Jack at Winchester, and I have to talk to his mom. So have Jack's mom back here the next day, and I'll come back and deliver the message. And at the very end of the article, Anna Culp Myers says that she always felt that part of the message was for Jennie Wade. But that's the only thing in the article that makes mention of possibly the message having anything to do with Jennie Wade. So in 1939, Margaret Myers, who's the daughter of Anna Culp Myers, the niece of Wesley Culp, writes a paper and basically takes George Fleming's article and reprints the article, but adds some other details. And in that article, which is again reprinted in 1954 in a York newspaper that we can look at, the details are different about the meeting. And at that meeting, Wesley says, I have a message for Jennie Wade. And according to that article, Anna Culp Myers says, here's a piece of paper, can you write it down and I'll deliver it? No, I must deliver it myself. And then, of course, Wesley Culp leaves the house, returns to his unit, is never seen again, and is killed in the fighting somewhere east of the town. So I think an important delineation in this story is that it's not until much more recently that the message that Wesley Culp has is associated with Jennie Wade. That this seems to be an aspect of the story that's embellished in more recent times. Or I guess you could argue that Margaret had talked to her mother, and her mother was not, then Sally Myers related the story after Anna Culp had died, did not divulge that detail about Jennie Wade. And then Margaret added that to the story because she knew. I don't know if I buy that, because there's other mistakes that Margaret makes in the article. Another thing that Margaret insists upon that I don't have any evidence for is that William Culp, who's in the 87th Pennsylvania, survives the Battle of Winchester, ends up in Bedford, with part of the 87th out there, that his wife and children are living with Anna Culp Myers on Middle Street also. So when Wesley goes there, he sees the wife and kids of his brother who he shot at a couple weeks earlier at Winchester. But that's not mentioned in any other source except this later reminiscence by Margaret telling us what her mother told her. And of course, I'm sure you guys, it probably goes without saying, Margaret, who wrote this, was born in 1867 and was not there. This is not an eyewitness. She's telling stories she heard her mother tell after her mother's death. So, there's all these complicated factors in the story. So, I guess what I'm saying to you guys is, I don't believe that Wesley Culp has a message for Jennie Wade. I just don't buy it. But he does have a message. He does want to talk to Jack's mom. Jack's mom lives on Middle Street. He doesn't get to talk to her. He goes back to his unit, and he's killed in the fighting. Where is Wesley Culp killed? I'll tell you what, there's almost no way he's killed on Culp property. If he's killed in the early morning skirmish with some of the skirmish duty of the 2nd Virginia against troops that were positioned along Rock Creek, he would be killed on the Benner farm. Then the 2nd Virginia, of course, was moved with the Stonewall Brigade out to Brinkerhoff Ridge and fought against elements of the 10th New York Cavalry, out there on July 2nd. If he's killed in the mid-morning out there, he's killed on Brinkerhoff property. So Wesley Culp clearly is not, and if he's killed on July 3rd, if we're wrong about the day and it is July 3rd, he's killed on Spangler property or across the creek on Tawney property. But the 2nd Virginia really isn't, while he's there, they're not really on Culp's Hill. They might not be on Culp's Hill at any point in the battle. So again, I guess one of the aspects of the story I kind of push back against is that Wesley Culp is killed on the hill where he grew up as a child, or the hill that named after his family. He's definitely killed somewhere else. But you probably know the body is never recovered. One of the members of Wesley Culp's company comes into Gettysburg on the evening of July 3rd, goes to the sister's house. I don't know exactly how he knew where the sister lived, and told Anna that Wesley was killed in the fighting. They buried him on top of a hill under a broken, bent tree. I'm sure there's only one of them somewhere east of town. And they can't find his body, but remarkably, they find a piece of the musket broken off that has his initials on it, and that's the one you see pictures of that was sold. Some of these things that are relic associated, I always wonder if the stories aren't just contrived to go along with an item that's being sold. Like the bullet that killed Jennie Wade. Remember when that was sold? There's a good newspaper article about it. They were displaying it at the museum. Seriously. Well, it's not that serious. Okay. Regardless, Wesley was killed in the battle. His body was never found. You might hear, the family says his body was never found. And even, after people are like, no, they're just saying that. They found his body. Then the family members are like, no, we never found his body. Margaret, in her later writings, is like, hey, we never found the body. But people are convinced that they did find the body, and they secretly buried it somewhere. And you see that crops up in the newspaper every once in a while in the years after the Civil War. Yeah. Now, of course, Jennie was killed on the morning of July 3rd, 1863. Oh, I should, at this point, before I get into that last part, I wanted to mention that I worked with Bob O'Connell on this book about his novel about Wesley Culp and William Culp. Anybody remember what it was called? I have a copy somewhere. No? But anyway, it's a novel. You can look it up. Bob O'Connell. And in the novel, he had William Culp come back to Gettysburg And William Culp is in the house when Wesley Culp visits the house and says he has a message for Jack's mom and Jennie Wade. And so William Culp, the guy he was fighting against at Winchester, is there in the house, and he won't talk to him. He doesn't talk to him. And I said, Bob, okay, it's a novel, okay? You already have William Culp there in the house. Why don't you have William Culp sneak over to Cemetery Hill, offer his services to the Union Army because he's from here and knows the area well, have him have a musket and sneak down Culp's Hill, see Wesley, and shoot and kill Wesley? Isn't that a genius plot twist? And he wouldn't do it. I guess it would destroy the integrity of the historical novel. Okay, I hope Bob gets to hear this. He'll crack up about that. But yeah, there's some parts of the story. You know, what I'm going to also suggest is this could be a really good made-for-TV movie. And I am simply stunned that no one has attempted it or tried it, because some of it is just really hard to believe that it all came together the way it did. So if somebody accepts my screenplay, you know, for this, then I'm going to have William kill his own brother. I think that would be a fitting ending. Okay. So Jennie Wade is killed on July 3rd. And you know, there is another staple of the Jennie Wade story that you might not be thinking about, is that when they had Jennie in the cellar and they checked her apron, in her apron there was a daguerreotype of Jack Skelly found on her body. And according to a 1903 account of it, 1903, in her pocket after her death was found the photograph of a soldier serving in the 87th Pennsylvania near Winchester. It was a portrait of Corporal Skelly of Company F. He had been killed at the Battle of Carter's Woods 15 days before. When he left his home at Gettysburg in 1861, he was engaged to be married to Jennie Wade. Upon his return from the war, in his inside vest pocket after his death was found a small photograph of Mrs. Wade, or Miss Wade. Neither of the two knew of the other's death. The invasion of Lee's army and the excitement caused by it prevented the mails from reaching Gettysburg to notify Miss Wade or any of her friends of the sad news of the corporal's death on the field of battle. Such is the story of Jennie Wade and Corporal Skelly. That's pretty good in 1903, don't you think? And that's reprinted in a bunch of newspapers. So I really like that. I found all kinds of outrageous versions of the story. And it's amazing to me, you know, and I'm sure this happens to us as tour guides all the time. Miller, what was his first name? I forget off the top of my head. Robert Miller purchased the Jennie Wade house. He actually got it because his wife was the daughter of the Kitts Millers that owned the house. And in 1901, he opened up a museum there. And he gave tours. And he told details of the story that we're talking about tonight. And people listened to his stories, and he did a very good job, and I've seen explanations of in detail of his stories, and he was pretty accurate when he described the details of Jennie Wade's death. But then we have dozens and dozens of newspapers around the country. People come to Gettysburg, go on his tour, listen to what he says, and just massacre the facts in their articles. One of my favorites is Jack Skelly was in the Pennsylvania Bucktails and was wounded in the Battle of Gettysburg. And Jennie runs out onto the battlefield to get his dying words, and as she's running back to the house, she's killed. And there's an account where Jennie Wade is not killed by a stray bullet. Jennie Wade, as he's putting bread in the oven, and this one's from really early on, an artillery shell comes through the house and smashes into her. Can you imagine an artillery shell? So instead of a bullet. So there's lots of really interesting accounts of this. So anyway, Jennie was killed in the battle. And of course, I mentioned Jack died at the Taylor House Hospital, not 2 weeks before the battle, but he died on July 12th, 1863. And William D. Holdsworth was specifically asked the question in one of the newspaper interviews, do you think Jack knew that Jennie had been killed? Is that possible? And he said, absolutely not. The timing doesn't work out. And for the last week, Jack was incoherent. We have an account by a guy who was also captured at Winchester who went to the hospital and saw him a couple days before he died, and he was unconscious and he wasn't really talking and he didn't know anything. So Jack did not know of Jennie's death. So whatever message Wesley may have carried was never delivered. It is clear that Jennie died never knowing that Jack was dying in a hospital in Virginia, and it's also clear that Jack died never knowing that Jennie was the only civilian to be killed in the battle. And of course, eventually both bodies were recovered, and today you may know that Jack and Jennie are buried 50 yards apart in the Evergreen Cemetery. Isn't that sad? And I'm sure if there's an afterlife, which, I rail against, I am sure that they're still together. I'm sure if they have ghosts, the ghost would be here in the Farnsworth house trying to find the guy who shot her, right? Okay, so anybody have any questions about the life and times of Jennie Wade before I stop here? This is your opportunity to ask my opinion. Ted?
So what's the basis for the idea that Jennie, isn't there this statement that Jennie was a Southern sympathizer?
Yeah, well, okay. It's interesting. I have one really interesting account of that in 1913, written by a visitor, that summarizes it pretty well. But there's a couple things that play into it. But the first thing is that Jennie's name is Virginia. Her father is born in Virginia. Jennie's sister is named Georgia. So there's this indication that her father was proud of his Southern upbringing when these girls were born in the 1840s. Not that that has anything to do with, the 1860s. And then, obviously, people locally were kind of taken aback by the idea that Jennie Wade got so much notoriety and so much fame early on. In December of 1863, there's an article in the Harrisburg newspaper about how the people of Harrisburg want to raise money to put up a monument to poor, sweet, innocent Jennie Wade. The only Gettysburg citizens to sacrifice themselves on the, patriotism, the only patriotic person in Gettysburg, baking bread for the soldiers. And the local people took this drive by the people in Harrisburg as an insult. And it was a huge argument in the papers over this idea that Gettysburg didn't have men serving in the army, or that the people in Gettysburg didn't care for wounded afterwards. So right away, the promotion of Jennie Wade as a heroine struck some of the people as a backhanded slap in the face of the people in Gettysburg who were not considered patriotic. And there had been a lot of attention in the papers about the wounded in the hospitals after the battle and the conditions in Gettysburg, and why aren't the people doing more to care for the wounded, and they only think of themselves, and there's all kinds of interesting things going on there in that regard. So one of the people that was doing pretty well was John Burns. And John Burns, as a matter of fact, in his poem that became quite popular after the Civil War, remember, he's the only man in town who didn't back down. And while the rest of the cowards are hiding in their cellars, John Burns is fighting for his country. And so John Burns was able to put himself, use the preconceived notions about the cowardly people of Gettysburg to his advantage. And then what happened was there was a guy named Frank Moore, and he wrote a book called Women of the War. And he was writing this book, I believe, in 1867, I believe it was. And his papers are at Duke University. And I actually wrote to the archivist there and got a copy of a letter. He wrote a letter to John Burns of Gettysburg. He wanted to include Jennie Wade in his book, Women of the War. And he didn't know anybody in Gettysburg, but he'd heard of John Burns. So he wrote a letter to John Burns asking for information about Jennie. And John Burns clearly did not enjoy sharing the spotlight, especially with Jennie Wade. Who was she to John Burns? He was a constable while her father was public enemy number one. He probably was involved in some of her father's arrests. But anyway, in that letter, he says, the least said about her, the better. And he says something like, the story about her being killed while baking bread for the soldiers is fiction. And then he said, I called her a she-rebel. And he insinuates she's a Southern sympathizer. And then he says in it, charity to her reputation forbids any further remarks. So John Burns is the one who really probably lit the wood on fire, in this, burning of Jennie Wade. But I think I always try to liken it to my own feelings. And it's that I'm sure the people of Gettysburg, when visitors came, they were like, so tell us about Jennie Wade. Did you know Jennie Wade? And they're probably like, yeah, we know Jennie Wade, yeah. So, I'll just tell you from my standpoint, and I know I understand how unfair this is, but if a tourist asks me about Joshua Chamberlain, I'm going to lose it. And I try not to, but when you're there on the battlefield and there's all these stories you can tell about the battle and there's all these people you can talk about, and they want to know about Joshua Chamberlain. And the thing is, the first 350 times, it's all right. But it's just, I know it's not, I shouldn't do it. I know I shouldn't say, I shouldn't do, I should just say something and let it go. But it's hard. And it boils over sometimes. And I found myself saying things I can't believe I'm saying. Yeah. He was governor 6 times. It was only a 1-year term. It's just crazy. Do you guys ever do that? Do you lose it and you're like, I shouldn't.
Not the only one up there.
Yeah, I mean, it gets crazy. And so I just try to, I try to take that experience that I have with that and think about what it must have been like for the people of Gettysburg when somebody came into your restaurant and you had a house full of wounded after the battle and they want to know about Jennie Wade. And then you might say something about her boyfriends or something about her not being patriotic or some rumor you heard somebody else say. Okay, that was a long answer, Ted, I'm sorry. Any other questions? And then we'll...
I've got one comment I'd like to make, and the hard image that you referenced in the newspaper was in Jennie Wade's apron is in the National Park Service collection. And it is currently on display, put on display in July in the new temporary gallery in the new exhibit that the Gettysburg Foundation helped fund called Rough Course Life. So if you want to see that image, you can go over to the visitor center and see it.
And I didn't mention, too, since we're mentioning it, the image of Jennie Wade, the only known image of Jennie Wade, the daguerreotype recorded at Spade Studio in 1861 with Maria Comfort in it, which Ted lives in the house that they owned. That's on display too, there too. So it is the rotating special exhibit. And hey, it's a great time to go up to the visitor center now, this time of year. Yes.
Let me also say that the Masons let me look at the minute book, and it listed all the names of the 10th New York Cavalry soldiers who were Masons that went to the Masonic meetings in the town.
Oh, that's nice.
Identified them by their unit and by what lodge they were in. So I guarantee you, those men came in here in the town, and if you find letters in the 10th New York for that training period, I know you're going to find civilians mentioned.
Yeah, there's when John Wayne Johnson was doing his book in 1917 on the true story of Jennie Wade, the Gettysburg Maiden. He's got a lot of correspondence that he collected with Jennie Wade's story, and he's got a map that someone drew of the house on Breckenridge Street where Jennie lived at the time, not where she was killed, but where she lived, and someone, and I'm assuming it's Georgia, circled an area near the fireplace, and it said, "This is the spot where we entertain soldiers of the 10th New York." So, there's here. Think about this: you live in the town of Gettysburg. Let's say we'll say you're Jennie Wade. So let's say you're 19 years old. You're living in the town of Gettysburg, and you never go anywhere, and all the men have left town in the Army, and 700 men from New York are stationed in the town. And you girls are the USO. You can imagine. Oh, we do have at least 2 marriages from local girls to the 10th New York soldiers. Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And now we'll all watch the game. You can come by and ask
Need a Corps badge or other insignia for your uniform? Then check out the Badge Maker. Here's what some of his satisfied customers had to say. Miranda said, "I ordered an identification disc from Joe and it's fantastic. He hand-stamped it exactly as I wanted." Greg said, "My unit has purchased from him in the past quality badges and good service." And Jerry S. says, "The Badge Maker is the go-to place for accurate replica Civil War badges. So go to CivilWarCorpsBadges.com and attach a message with your order saying you heard about him on Addressing Gettysburg."
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Garryowen in glory. Instead of spa or drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail, no man forget shall go to jail from Garryowen in glory. Instead of spa or drink